Dawn broke over the Louisiana swamps, mist curling above the reeds, when a bobcat kitten stumbled to the muddy bank, limping, blood on its paw. But then the water split. Old Scar, the giant alligator, surged forward just as a shadowy male bobcat stepped from the fog, planting himself between predator and cub. Claws against jaws, wild against wild, and in that heartbeat, the rescue team faced a choice. Stand back and let nature decide, or risk everything to intervene. Where are you watching from? Comment your city or country below. And if this moment grips you, like and subscribe for more true stories of courage, heartbreak, and hope. Dawn in the Louisiana wetlands didn't so much arrive as rise from the water, a pale glow seeping through cypress knees and curtains of Spanish moss. Breath of the swamp turning to milk-white fog. The first sharp thing in that softness was the sudden thunder of wings, flocks of blue-winged teal blasting into the air as if a giant hand had clapped. The second sharp thing was a cry no louder than a torn reed, the sound a small creature makes when it's run out of places to hide. A bobcat kitten, 3, maybe 4 months old, limped along the mucky rim of a shallow bayou, each step a wince, each breath a little bloom of steam in the cool morning. Mud clung to its paws, the right hind leg wouldn't take weight. A thorn, a cut. The paw pads showed a crescent of darkened blood where something had split them. Maybe oyster shell, maybe rusted wire from a long-forgotten fence swallowed by the swamp. There was no mother in sight. Just the kitten's ribs fluttering under spotted fur, and the ache of distance in the way it kept turning its head, listening for a call that didn't come. On a low john boat nosing through duckweed, the Cypress Creek Wildlife Rescue Team cut their small engine and drifted. Rachel Collins stood near the bow, 1 foot braced on the metal lip, binoculars balanced so lightly it looked like the swamp itself held them up. 10 seasons in these wetlands had taught her what to ignore and what to let press on her heart like a thumb bruise. This scene pressed hard. The winter fronts were marching down from the north, stacking mist and wind like timber. Storms here didn't ask permission. Behind her, David coiled a line and let it rest on the deck. He was younger, shoulders still learning to carry what this work asks a person to carry, but his eyes were steady. He followed Rachel's gaze, saw the limp, the way the kitten set its paw down wrong, the way hunger makes decisions for the body. They moved with the swamp's manners, slow, respectful, angles soft enough not to disturb the water's memory. The boat whispered past a raft of hyacinth, past a half-sunk stump with a heron standing loose and tall upon it, like a carved ornament on a riverboat. Something larger rolled far off, a lazy swirl that might have been a gar or might have been a shadow with teeth. The air carried that tin-bright smell of coming rain. Rachel kept a quiet inventory. Weight too low, fur rough, gait compromised. In these marshes, 3 truths rule a young predator's life. You must be quick enough to eat, wary enough not to be eaten, and lucky enough to find a mother who is both. The kitten had one of those 3 at best. The bird explosion had rippled the whole flat. Now it settled. Dragonflies stitched green thread across the shallows. The kitten tested a hummock of grass, sank a little, corrected, lifted its head toward the tree line as if the trees might have an answer that tucked into their gray bark. Rachel signaled with 2 fingers, and David eased them toward a cypress hummock where a cable-lock trail camera hung half-hidden under drooping moss. The plan today had been routine. Check cards, replace batteries, add 2 new cameras along a game path, where raccoons and bobcats often moved at dusk. But routine rarely survives contact with the swamp's way of telling a different story. They grounded the John boat on a ridge of packed mud. David hopped off first, boots making a soft kiss against the earth, and tied the line around a snorting. Rachel stepped onto the hummock and crouched to check the camera's status light, solid red, blinking every 5 seconds. She slid the card free and tucked it into a waterproof pouch. When she looked up, the kitten had edged closer, curiosity fighting the rule of fear. Its ears rotated like tiny satellite dishes. It sniffed the air and lowered its head, listening again to the silence behind the trees. Wind moved through the swamp with the sound of a slow-turning page. In that rustle came other human notes. The far pop of a duck hunter's shotgun from deeper marsh. The moan of a pickup's tires on the levee road miles away. Rachel felt the old friction rise. People who treasured these wetlands and people who used them carelessly. People who fed coyotes at the boat ramp. People who set illegal leg-hold traps where a bobcat could step and be lost to pain and panic before anyone found it. The kitten tried to stretch, tested the bad leg, and gamely placed weight again, braver than its bones could afford. Rachel watched the tremor that ran along its flank. There was a stubborn light burning in it. That electric little I am mammals carry like a lantern. Even drowning rain can't fully put that light out. But storms have a way of tilting the board. A gust came, hard enough to lift the moss like hair and comb the surface into tight fists of water. Rachel glanced at the slate belly of the sky. "Front's moving faster than forecast," she said, mostly to the air. She made a second inventory now. Route back to the ramp. Time to the clinic if intervention became necessary. The risk calculus of stepping in versus letting wildness teach its lessons. David knelt and traced 2 faint slots pressed into the mud near the water. Fresh. Not deer. Feline. Bigger than the kittens. He looked at Rachel. Another bobcat had been here not long ago. The idea moved between them without words. A mother. A territorial male. Hard to say. The swamp keeps its secrets in the folds of its own hands. The kitten nosed toward a pocket of reeds where frogs often clicked and whickered. It paused, lifted a muddy paw, and swayed, as if strength and instinct had started wrestling inside the same frame. Hunger tugged one way, pain tugged the other. It made a tiny lunge at nothing and nearly toppled, catching itself with both forepaws, sides heaving with the effort of pretending that hadn't cost everything it had left. Rachel felt the old argument start up under her ribs. You don't build a rescue by rescuing everything. You build it by choosing when to be patient and when to be brave. The mission stapled to the office wall wasn't poetry. Stabilize, rehabilitate, release. But the margins around those words held all the ache. She pulled a small pouch from her vest and set a scent lure on the ground near the trail camera's field of view. Not bait, not food, nothing to alter behavior, just enough of a curiosity note to keep the kitten in frame if it wandered back this way. A neutral marker. A promise to the future. We'll watch. We'll learn. Cloud shadow moved over the whole bayou in a single piece. The heron lifted, legs trailing like dark strings. Far off, thunder rolled, a bowling ball down a god-long lane. The John boat rocked with the first big raindrops. "Let's set the new cam on the willow bend," Rachel said, and her voice had that low steadiness people trust when the water rises. David nodded, shouldered the second camera, and followed her along the hummock's firmer spine. They mounted it high, angled across the shallows where frogs made a living and small things honed their pounce. When they turned back toward the boat, the kitten was gone, folded into the swamp the way mist folds into sky. Only the impression of its small body remained in the grass, a pressed oval, a little warmth evaporating. Rachel stood a moment longer than necessary, feeling for what she couldn't see. The camera's status light winked to life, a patient, blinking eye. The storm's first hard line washed across the bayou, and the swamp became a glass hammered by 1,000 soft fists. Somewhere beyond the willow bend, water lifted and laid back down. Just a swell, nothing more, unless it wasn't. They pushed off. The engine coughed, caught, and the John boat moved like a leaf with intention. Behind them, the red light kept blinking, 5 seconds on, 5 seconds off, counting down toward whatever the swamp would show next. The swamp grew quieter after the first wall of rain passed. Sheets of mist clung to the cypress knees, turning the world into pale smoke. Rachel and David anchored the John boat near the willow bend, hoping their new trail camera would catch something worth studying. What they didn't expect was how quickly the swamp would deliver. On the camera's small monitor, the Bobcat Kitten reappeared. Its fur looked darker now, plastered by drizzle. Its ribs rising and falling like a drum, too thin to beat much longer. The kitten crouched low in the reeds, eyes locked on a frog chirping at the water's edge. It tried to pounce, its body springing forward in a brave arc. But the injured leg betrayed it. Instead of a clean strike, the kitten collapsed into the mud with a soft, broken sound. The frog vanished into the swamp, and the little hunter lay trembling, face streaked with mud, sides heaving as though it had sprinted a mile. Rachel felt the ache bloom in her chest. Even David muttered under his breath, "It doesn't stand a chance like this." But the swamp had already written the next line of the story. Just beyond the reeds, the water bulged. Twin ridges cut the surface, silent, patient, deliberate. Then 2 lantern-yellow eyes lifted from the murk, followed by the blunt snout of an alligator that dwarfed the little cat. Its jaw bore a jagged scar, a pale seam that ran from nostril to hinge, as if someone once tried and failed to cut its face in half. Local guides had spoken of him before. Old Scar, the tyrant of this bayou. He hovered there, motionless except for the slow blink of reptilian eyes. Every ripple whispered intent. Predators of his size didn't waste energy unless the meal was sure. And right now, the meal looked no bigger than a rabbit. Rachel's hand tightened on her vest pocket where the tranquilizer pistol rested. Her voice dropped to a whisper, barely stirring the air. Do we intervene, or let nature take its course? The question sat heavy between them. Every wildlife code said not to meddle unless absolutely necessary, to let predator and prey live by the rules older than law. But watching that mud-smeared kitten struggle to lift its head, Rachel's breath stuttered. Intervention meant breaking the ancient contract. Doing nothing meant letting innocence vanish in the jaws of an old monster. Old Scar inched forward, water folding around his massive back. The swamp seemed to hold its breath, cicadas falling silent, even the rain softening to a hush. David raised the binoculars, jaw tight. He's lining up, he murmured. He's going for it. Rachel's heart thudded like a drumbeat swallowed by fog. She thought of every lecture she'd given at town meetings about balance, about not interfering with the wild's harsh lessons. Yet standing here with mud, mist, and a fragile pulse on the line, the words felt suddenly small. And in the space of a blink, the swamp shifted again. The kitten, sensing the wrongness in the air, turned its head. Its ears pricked, not at the water, but at something deeper in the fog. The hush grew heavier, like a curtain about to fall. Rachel leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Something was coming. Something the swamp hadn't shown them yet. The silence in the swamp was so dense it seemed the air itself had weight. Old Scar floated closer, his scarred jaw just beneath the film of water, the faint ridges on his back like a row of black stones. The Bobcat Kitten froze in the mud, sides shivering, ears twitching at every ripple. Rachel's finger hovered near the safety on her tranquilizer gun, torn between instinct and protocol. Then the silence cracked. From deep within the fog came a sound no one expected, a low, guttural growl, carried like thunder rumbling through hollow cypress trunks. The kitten lifted its head sharply, eyes wide. Even Old Scar's movements slowed, a predator acknowledging another presence. Out of the mist stepped a figure as startling as the cry. A massive male bobcat. His coat mottled bronze and ash, shoulders rippling with muscle. The rescue team's cameras had recorded solitary males before, ghosts drifting through territory. But rarely this close and never like this. He moved with calm authority, tail low, ears pricked forward, every line of his body warning, "This place is claimed." David whispered without looking away. "He's huge." The big cat's eyes locked first on the kitten. The little one tried to press itself smaller into the mud, trembling, expecting attack from yet another angle. But instead, the male lowered his head, sniffed the kitten's matted fur, and, astonishingly, groomed it with a slow lick across the crown of its head. Rachel's breath caught, her whisper barely more than a confession to the swamp itself. "We don't know if he's the father, or just another male. But protecting a kitten like this, it's almost unheard of." The kitten blinked, frozen in disbelief as much as fear, then leaned ever so slightly into the warmth of the larger bobcat's chest. The gesture was tentative, but real. And the male, Shadow, Rachel would later call him in her notes, stood sentinel over the fragile life at his paws. For a moment, Old Scar held his ground. The scarred gator's yellow eyes glowed through the mist, unmoving, as though calculating the risk. The swamp had seen this stalemate before. Predator against predator, neither willing to yield easily. A ripple slid away from his tail. The gator's nostrils broke the surface with a soft snort, and Rachel felt the muscles in her legs tense as if she were the one in that standoff. The storm rumbled overhead, vibrating the water. Shadow stayed motionless except for the slow flick of his tail, but the message was clear. Not this one. Not today. David exhaled, the sound harsh in the quiet. "I've never seen anything like it," he said. His words trembled with awe more than fear. Rachel didn't answer right away. She was still locked on the scene, memorizing every detail, because moments like this were almost myth. Male bobcats were solitary hunters, often hostile even to their own kind. The sight of one choosing to shield, to comfort, to protect a kitten, it defied everything she'd learned from books and fieldwork alike. She finally said softly, This could change how we understand them." Shadow's ears twitched at a distant sound in the swamp, but his body remained a fortress. The kitten pressed closer into the thick ruff of his chest, eyes closing for the first time in what might have been hours of fear. The storm's wind shifted again, bending the reeds. The rescue team's cameras blinked their steady red lights, recording history that neither Rachel nor David had ever dared hope for. Still, the swamp held its breath. Because even with Shadow's rare protection, danger was not finished. Old Scar had not retreated, only waited. The water at his back rippled again, faint, deliberate. Rachel whispered, almost to herself, "The story isn't over. Not yet." And in the depths of the swamp, balance teetered, waiting for the next strike. The swamp erupted in motion without warning. Old Scar, patient no longer, surged from the water with a violence that split the mist like glass. His scarred jaw opened wide, lined with teeth honed by decades, the strike aimed straight at the trembling kitten. Rachel gasped, her finger twitching toward the tranquilizer pistol. But before she could even steady her aim, Shadow exploded forward. The male bobcat's roar was primal, a sound that seemed to tear straight from the marrow of the swamp itself. His body was all fury and sinew as he launched into the gator's path, claws unsheathed, fangs bared. The collision was chaos. Water geysered into the air, drenching the cypress knees and the trembling reeds. Shadow struck with his forepaws, raking across Old Scar's scarred jaw. The alligator snapped sideways, jaws closing with a crack like breaking bone, missing the cat by inches. The kitten scrambled beneath a gnarled tree root, pressing into the mud, eyes wide moons of fear. Its small chest heaved, each breath a rasp against the roar of battle. David whispered harshly, "He'll be torn apart." His hand clenched the gunwale of the boat, helpless fury in his knuckles. But Shadow was no easy prey. Again and again he darted, striking with claws, leaping back just before Old Scar's massive tail whipped the water into walls. The gator's weight churned mud into clouds, teeth snapping with the sound of an iron trap slamming shut. Each time the bobcat barely evaded, using speed and rage like weapons forged from desperation. Rachel's heart hammered so hard it felt like the swamp itself had taken hold of her chest. She wanted to shout, to intervene, but something about the wild ferocity of Shadow's stand rooted her on. This was more than instinct. This was defiance. Old Scar lunged again, jaws clamping down on empty space where the bobcat had been a second before. Shadow twisted in midair, his hind paws striking across the gator's snout with a force that sent blood blooming into the water. The reptile hissed, thrashing in fury, waves rolling out like thunder. The swamp became a storm of its own. Guttural roars, the crash of water, the slap of tail against mud. For a terrifying instant, Shadow's paw caught in the jagged edge of Old Scar's jaw scar. The gator jerked, dragging the bobcat under in a swirl of blood and spray. Rachel's breath caught. She thought it was over. Then Shadow erupted back into the air, flinging himself free with a snarl that echoed like a curse through the cypress stand. He landed on the bank near the kitten, sides heaving. Fur slicked and torn, but eyes still blazing. His growl was lower now, a warning drawn from some bottomless well. Old Scar paused. The gator floated just yards away, golden eyes fixed, but his body sagged with the weight of the fight. For all his strength, the relentless ferocity of the bobcat had cost him more than expected. Slowly, as though promising this wasn't surrender but a postponement, the reptile sank back into deeper water. Ripples spread and vanished, leaving only the stench of churned mud and blood. Rachel let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The swamp's chorus began again. Frogs, insects, the drip of rain returning to its steady rhythm, as if the land itself had exhaled relief. The kitten whimpered beneath the tree root. Shadow turned, licking its head again, standing over it like a battered guardian. His body trembled with exhaustion, but his stance never wavered. David whispered, almost reverent, "He drove it off. He actually saved the little one." Rachel nodded, eyes still locked on the sight. "For now," she murmured, "but he can't protect it forever." The swamp, heavy with secrets, seemed to agree. The balance had shifted, but not enough to last, and Rachel knew the next move would belong to them. Rain thickened into a steady curtain, drumming on the John boat's aluminum hull. Rachel wiped water from her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. Shadow stood guard over the kitten, his sides heaving, fur ripped in places, but his gaze never left the tree line. The kitten pressed against his chest, too exhausted to even tremble. This was the moment. Rachel knew it. Nature had shown its hand. A kitten too weak to last, a male cat who had fought beyond instinct, and a swamp that gave no second chances. If they waited, old Scar, or hunger, would claim the little one soon enough. She raised the tranquilizer rifle slowly, every motion deliberate, her breath measured against the pulse in her ears. David caught her glance. His eyes asked the question he didn't dare voice. Rachel's reply was silent but firm. "Now." The dart flew with a soft hiss, striking the kitten's flank. It startled, yowling weakly, then sagged into Shadow's fur. The big male stiffened, muscles corded with suspicion. His growl rolled low, thunderous, a warning that prickled every hair on Rachel's arms. "Easy," she whispered into the storm, as if the wild cat could hear the calm she wove into her voice. "We're not here to take you, just the little one." Shadow didn't move, but his ears flicked, his golden eyes locked on the humans. He loomed protectively over the kitten as its body slumped deeper into drowsiness, tiny paws twitching in dreamlike protest. David moved first, climbing off the boat into the mud, carrying the transport crate. Each step sounded far too loud in the hush between rain beats. Rachel followed, her rifle lowered but ready, though every part of her wanted to believe she wouldn't need it. They crouched near the tree root. Shadow lowered his head, ears pressed back, his growl vibrating through the earth. David froze, waiting for Rachel. Her hand trembled on the crate's latch. The decision hung there like lightning in the air. Would the male attack? Would he lunge, teeth first, to protect the life he had fought so fiercely for? But he didn't. Instead, Shadow stepped back. Not far, only a pace, but enough. His eyes burned with wariness, yet there was no lunge, no strike. He simply stood, every muscle drawn like a bowstring, watching as Rachel gently lifted the kitten into the crate. The little one stirred, whimpered, then went limp again under the tranquilizer's weight. Rachel's chest tightened with relief and sorrow in equal measure. She shut the crate door softly, as though gentleness could bridge the gulf between human and wild. When she rose, Shadow's eyes followed her. He made a sound, a short, throaty rasp, half snarl, half sigh. It wasn't consent, not really, but it wasn't defiance either. Rachel whispered, "He's letting us take the little one. Maybe he understands." They backed toward the boat, careful not to turn their backs until they were on the deck. David secured the crate, covering it with a tarp to shield against the rain. The kitten gave no sound now, just shallow breaths that fogged the air inside the box. Shadow remained beneath the cypress roots, rain streaming down his fur. His eyes never left them, wary but unyielding, a sentinel carved from the swamp's heart. As Rachel pulled the motor to life, the John boat chugged away through the reeds. She looked back once more. The male bobcat stood like a statue at the water's edge, his reflection shivering in the storm-churned water. For a long moment, predator and human held one another's gaze across the rain. The swamp swallowed the distance, but the feeling stayed. They had taken a fragile life from his care. And yet, against every law of instinct, he had let them. Rachel whispered into the downpour, as if the storm might carry her words back to him. "We'll bring it back. I promise." The boat slid into the mist, the red glow of the camera blinking behind them, marking where wildness and mercy had collided. The Cypress Creek Rescue Center smelled of antiseptic and cedar shavings, a strange marriage of medicine and wild. Rachel carried the crate through the double doors, her soaked jacket clinging to her skin. Inside, the storm's roar dulled to a steady hum, as if the world outside belonged to another life entirely. The Bobcat Kitten lay curled in a bundle of damp fur and trembling breath. Under the fluorescent lights, Rachel could see the gashes across its paw pads, the bruised muscle in the hind leg. "Let's get fluids in. Warm it up," she ordered, her voice sharper than she meant. David hurried to set the IV line, hands clumsy with urgency. Hours blurred into a rhythm of work, stitching, cleaning, hydrating, wrapping the tiny paw in gauze. The kitten never once cried out, just blinked its wide eyes with a glassy confusion that made Rachel's chest ache. At last, they settled it into a heated enclosure lined with towels. A slow drip of saline steadied the rhythm of its fragile heartbeat. Rachel sat on the stool beside the glass, shoulders slumped. She spoke softly, even when she knew the words wouldn't be understood. "You fought harder than most adults would. Now let us fight for you." The next days passed in a quiet struggle. At first, the kitten barely lifted its head. But by the third morning, it licked water from a shallow dish, its whiskers twitching as though rediscovering the taste of survival. By the fifth, its eyes had regained a tiny spark, weak but undeniable. Rachel found herself lingering by the cage more often than she admitted, notebook forgotten in her lap. She told herself it was professional observation, but deep down she knew it was something closer to attachment. Each time the kitten's gaze met hers, something in her steadied, as if the swamp's chaos had left her with this one fragile tether. But not everyone shared her conviction. At the weekly town meeting, voices rose sharp and angry. A rancher stood, hat clenched in his fist. "Why save a predator? That cat grows up, it'll be after my calves." Murmurs of agreement swept the room. Another man barked, "We've got enough problems with hogs and coyotes. You're wasting funds nursing a killer." Rachel pushed back her chair, the weight of the room pressing on her. "Bobcats aren't villains," she said firmly. "They keep rodent populations in check. They're part of the balance that keeps this swamp alive. You lose them, you invite collapse." The crowd didn't soften. Some crossed their arms, others muttered under their breath. Conflict was older than the rescue center itself. Fear of what wild things might take against the promise of what they give. That night, back at the center, Rachel sat beside the kitten's enclosure again. Its chest rose and fell in even rhythm, eyes closed in hard-earned rest. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, but behind it burned something resolute. "Let them doubt," she murmured. "We'll prove you belong here." And as the swamp sighed outside in the dark, the kitten shifted in its sleep, one paw pressing gently against the glass, as though answering, By the time spring light stretched over the cypress trees, the kitten's gait had steadied. The once ragged paw was wrapped now only in a slim bandage, and when it tested the length of its enclosure, it moved with an almost playful flick of its tail. Rachel stood at the glass, arms crossed, watching. Each leap, each cautious bound, was proof of survival, proof of the long nights and stitched wounds, proof, too, of the bond she hadn't meant to form. David stepped up beside her, coffee steaming in his hand. "You know what this means," he said gently. Rachel didn't look at him. "It means she's strong enough to try hunting again someday." He let the silence hang, then added, "It means she's ready to go home." The word home cut sharper than she wanted to admit. For weeks, Rachel had sat beside that cage, whispering through glass, feeding with cautious hands, watching the light return to those golden eyes. She had learned the kitten's rhythms, the way its ears perked when she entered, the little rasp of its tongue against the water dish. To her, it was no longer just a bobcat. It was this bobcat, a singular life threaded into her own. But she also knew what David meant. Wild creatures, no matter how fragile, could not be made into pets without stealing the very thing that made them whole. That evening, when the center had gone quiet, Rachel sat alone by the enclosure. The kitten blinked at her, tilting its head, pawing once at the glass. She whispered, "You're safe here. Out there. Out there's hunger, storms, gators, everything you barely escaped." Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to the glass. "How do I let you walk back into that?" Behind her, David's voice came, low but steady, "Because a wild creature is only truly alive when it's free." She turned, ready to argue, but the look on his face stopped her. He wasn't dismissing the bond. He was honoring it in the only way it could be honored. Rachel closed her eyes, fighting the ache rising in her throat. When she opened them again, the kitten had curled into a ball, tail wrapped over its nose, asleep and oblivious to the weight crushing her chest. She whispered into the stillness, not sure if it was a promise or a plea. "We'll take you back." The decision left her hollow, yet somehow lighter. She knew the hardest part of rescue was never the saving, it was the letting go. And outside, the swamp waited, patient and ancient, ready to test whether she had chosen right. The morning they chose for release broke with a quiet that felt ceremonial. Mist hovered low across Cypress Creek, rising in pale ribbons from the black water. Rachel loaded the transport crate into the John boat with hands that moved carefully, as though even the air around the kitten should not be disturbed. David steadied the boat, his silence saying more than words could. The ride back into the swamp felt longer than usual. Every bend of the waterway carried memory. The place where old Scar had surfaced, the willow bend where the cameras still blinked red, the roots beneath which the kitten had once cowered. When they finally nosed into the mud bank, Rachel's heart thudded like a drumbeat she couldn't calm. She crouched by the crate. Inside, the kitten shifted restlessly, muscles leaner now, eyes brighter, paws pressing against the mesh door. No longer a limp bundle of fur. This was an animal brimming with wild tension, waiting for release. Rachel swallowed. Her throat dry despite the swamp's damp breath. She pressed her palm against the crate and whispered, "This is your world, not mine." David gave a small nod. "Whenever you're ready." The latch clicked. Slowly, the door swung open. For a long moment, the kitten didn't move. Its ears flicked at the swamp sounds, the whine of insects, the drip of water from moss, the distant splash of a turtle sliding from a log. Then, with a cautious step, it slipped onto the mud. It didn't bolt. Instead, it stood still, golden eyes scanning the reeds, chest rising and falling. Then, unexpectedly, it turned back. For the briefest breath, Rachel swore its gaze locked with hers, curious, uncertain, almost questioning. Her throat tightened, and she bit down hard on the impulse to call out. The mist shifted. From it, a shadow emerged, broad shoulders, mottled fur, eyes like embers in the half-light. Shadow, the great male bobcat, stepped into view. His movements were fluid, deliberate, carrying the quiet authority of something that belonged wholly to this place. The kitten froze, then dashed forward with a sound that was half mew, half cry. It buried itself against Shadow's chest, small body pressing into his ruff of fur. The male lowered his head and brushed his muzzle across the kitten's crown in a gesture as startling as the first time Rachel had seen it. Acceptance, protection, family, in a language older than human knowing. Rachel's breath broke into a whisper. Nature has its own way of healing. David lifted the camera, snapping silent photos, but even he seemed reluctant to disturb the stillness. The moment felt carved from something sacred, a secret gift offered only once. Shadow led the kitten into the reeds. Their spotted coats vanished into the mist, tails flicking once before dissolving into the gray. Within seconds, they were gone, folded back into the swamp's endless mystery. Rachel stood rooted, the open crate at her knees, her hands trembling from both grief and awe. She had kept her promise, to heal, to return. But as the water lapped against the boat and the cicadas resumed their song, she understood something deeper. Letting go was not the end of the bond. It was the proof of it. 3 months later, the swamp wore summer's heavy cloak. Cypress knees jutted like ancient bones through dark water, and dragonflies stitched blue fire in the thick heat. Rachel sat in the field truck with David, reviewing the newest trail camera footage. Her pulse quickened as the images began to flicker. There, the kitten. No longer gaunt or staggering, but sleek, shoulders filled out, movements confident. It padded through the underbrush with a spring in its step, tail curling high with balance. In one clip, it crouched low, pupils dilated, then pounced cleanly on a field mouse. The kill was swift, efficient. Rachel couldn't help the quiet smile tugging her lips. "She's hunting," she murmured, almost in disbelief. But what made David lean forward, eyes wide, was the second figure in the frame. Shadow. The massive male moved just behind, keeping pace with a patient stride. He didn't intervene, didn't crowd. He watched. In another sequence, the footage caught him leading the kitten up a leaning cypress, pausing halfway to glance back. The smaller cat followed, claws sinking into bark, muscles straining, until at last it perched beside him, chest heaving but triumphant. Rachel whispered, "He's teaching her." The clips rolled on, Shadow wading across a shallow channel while the kitten hesitated, then after a pause splashed after him, head held just above water. Another night sequence showed the two silhouetted against moonlight, Shadow stalking, the kitten mirroring every crouch, every pause, every calculated breath. It wasn't survival alone. It was apprenticeship. Rachel leaned back, stunned. "This is groundbreaking. Male bobcats. They don't do this. They don't raise young. At best, they tolerate them. Her voice trembled with awe. But this is parenting. David nodded, flipping through frame after frame. The scientific community won't believe it unless they see it themselves. This could rewrite what we know. But to Rachel, the significance went beyond science. Watching Shadow's rough tongue groom the kitten's ear, seeing the way the little one nestled briefly against his chest before bounding off again, she felt something ancient and humbling. The swamp, for all its danger, had chosen to reveal an exception, an act of rare grace in a place defined by teeth and hunger. The world outside their bayou often argued that wildness was cruel, unforgiving, and yes, it was. Old Scar still lurked in deeper waters. Storms still split the sky without mercy. Yet here was proof that survival could also be nurtured. That strength could be shared, not hoarded. Rachel turned off the monitor, her reflection ghosted in the blank screen. If people could see this, she said softly, maybe they'd understand why we fight so hard to protect them. David glanced toward the swamp outside where cicadas screamed into the heat. Maybe, he said. Or maybe it's enough that we do. Through the truck's window, Rachel imagined Shadow's silhouette moving in the reeds, the kitten at his flank, learning the steps of an old secret dance. The swamp was still dangerous, still unyielding, but somewhere in its depths, a fragile life had not only survived, it was thriving, and that truth was more powerful than any argument she could make. The conference hall in Baton Rouge buzzed with the low murmur of scientists, conservationists, and reporters. Slides glowed on the large screen, images of the swamp, of Shadow and the kitten captured on trail cameras, of the storm-slick night when life teetered on the edge. Rachel stood at the podium, palms resting against the wood, the weight of months condensed into this moment. She looked out at the audience, not just colleagues, but policymakers, donors, people who would never walk Cypress Creek's muddy banks yet held power over its future. She began quietly, her voice steady but tinged with the swamp's gravity. In the wild, survival is often painted in sharp colors, predator and prey, victory and loss. But sometimes, nature shows us something different, something we never expect. She clicked to the footage of Shadow licking the frightened kitten's head, the audience gasping softly at the tenderness in the frame. Rachel let the silence stretch. We don't know if he was the father. What we do know is that a male bobcat, one of the most solitary carnivores in North America, not only protected, but raised a young one. We witnessed what textbooks told us was impossible. The next slide showed the grown kitten bounding across a ridge, muscles sleek, tail flicking in triumph. Saving one fragile life, Rachel said, voice rising, means saving more than just a creature. It means protecting balance. Each life carries a thread that holds the web together. Pull it out, and the whole swamp unravels. The room was silent now, not the silence of disinterest, but the silence of people holding breath. Rachel finished softly, but with conviction. Humanity is not the master of nature. We are its fragile guardians, here to protect fleeting moments so life may continue. That kitten is alive today because we chose to step in, not to tame, but to give wildness another chance. When she stepped down from the podium, applause swelled like a tide. Yet even as hands clapped, her mind drifted back to Cypress Creek, to Shadow's eyes glinting in the mist, to the tiny paw that once pressed against the glass of her enclosure, to the storm that had nearly ended it all. Weeks later, Rachel returned to the swamp. The air was thick with sunset, painted crimson and gold. She checked the cameras one last time before dusk. The final clip nearly stole her breath. There, caught in the fading light, the kitten, now vigorous and bold, leapt onto a ridge. For an instant, its body stretched against the sky, and its shadow cast long across the water, merging with the figure of the great male beside it. Rachel closed her eyes, letting the swamp's chorus wash over her. Frogs croaked, cicadas buzzed, wings sliced the air overhead. Life pulsed on in its relentless rhythm. She whispered into the dusk, not for anyone else but for the swamp itself. "Thank you." And the swamp, ancient and unyielding, answered only in silence, its lesson already spoken in the language of survival, mercy, and a fragile bond that defied every rule. Some stories from nature make us stop and ask ourselves, in a world ruled by survival and harsh laws, why is there still room for tenderness, for protection? That male bobcat had no reason to care for a fragile little one that wasn't his own. Yet he chose to do the impossible. And in doing so, he reminds us that even in the darkest places of danger, there can be light in the form of compassion. Have you ever experienced a moment when nature, or even a small animal, taught you a lesson bigger than life itself? Share your story in the comments below. Every story carries a spark that connects us closer together. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss more incredible journeys into the wild. Stories of courage, survival, and unexpected bonds. And tell me, what message did you see in the tale of this bobcat and its unlikely little companion?